Hi, everybody. My name is Cheryl Chan, and I'm here with Kathy Boyle. Welcome. We're so glad you joined us. Kathy, take it away.
I want to share the results of an initiative that really is a ground roots initiative that's grown over the last 3 weeks that's involved a few dozen parents. And it started, we call it doing better during the lockdown. And it's a discussion of why some folks seem to be doing better during the lockdown. Some adults with developmental disabilities seem to be doing better. And how we could explore preserving the positives as restrictions are lifted. And, where this all began was to talk about, we know some people are doing better with the lockdown, and we wanted to get some insights into how we could tweak existing options to better meet the full range of needs. Bearing in mind, we know that some people are doing worse and that just staying home is not optimal or sustainable for anyone in the long run. And our takeaway from the discussion at this point, 3 weeks in, is that we want to take steps towards a sustainable, billable, flexible approach to day services that's person-centered and helps individuals retain and build on the gains they've made.
Those are huge takeaways, and I'm really excited to learn more about everything that went on. You did mention that this is something that has become a conversation that involves a whole lot of community members, but I know that it didn't start that way. It really started with just a single observation on Facebook. So please tell me how you went from that observation to this growing initiative.
Well, we started with a single Facebook post, and that was by me, that my son was doing better during the lockdown. His behaviors were down, his mood was good, he seemed calmer generally. And the next thing you knew, 60 people had joined in and commented that they had experienced something similar, and they were interested in pursuing a discussion. So what I initially thought was going to be, say, 15 people having a chat on Zoom turned into something else, because you can't have a simple little chat with 60 people on Zoom. So we asked folks to email 3 sentences describing how their family member was doing. 40 people responded. And based on those responses, we created a survey monkey that we sent out to flesh out what we seemed to be seeing from the comments with some data. And we sent that out prior to the first Zoom call and got the data back from that. And what I'd like to share at this point are the slides from the first Zoom meeting. So we started with a word cloud based on the comments that we got. And you can see some things start to leap out here, but this was not as informative as you might think, because some people would say less anxious, and some people would say less anxiety, and some people would say calm, and some people would say calmer. So we thought, let's start merging synonyms so we can get a clearer picture. And this is what came out at this point. And you can see calmer, happier, fewer behaviors, less anxiety, fewer demands, fewer transitions, communicative, virtual, fewer SIBs leaping out. And at that point, we sent out the survey monkey. And again, we said, okay, based on the word clouds, these are the things that were leaping out a lot. Were these true for your family member? And calmer, less anxiety, fewer behaviors, happier were the big takeaways. We also included, we captured a few people who were participating in the discussion, but who said their kids were actually doing worse, which is not surprising because we knew from the get-go this wasn't everybody. And we asked for comments. And in the comments for that first question, those whose family members were doing worse were more likely to chime in. So about half of them were commenting on things that were, causing them to do worse, which again underscores this isn't true for everybody all the time. But we also saw taking precautions seriously, self-advocating well, enjoying fewer transitions. And then in question 2, we said, based on the possible explanations, check off the ones that apply to your family member. Fewer demands, fewer transitions, more predictable routine, more downtime. And the comments here were interesting. Predictability is key, knowing what will be happening each day. The untrainable staff members' negative impact is gone. Daily exercise, naps, enjoyable programming with one-to-one support. Gets a genuinely person-centered program. Activities are structured. Doesn't like all the noise at the program. Prefers to be socially distant. So there were no big surprises here. We know that enhanced fight, flight, or freeze is known to exist in some people with autism, leading to greater anxiety. And we also know that impaired concentration is a hallmark of anxiety disorders. That link there is to represent the fact that a number of people were pointing out that their kids were actually starting to engage in new activities and show initiative that they had not in the past.
You really captured some interesting feedback and some surprising feedback, but at the same time, it's not really all that surprising to a lot of people with regard to some of the factors that they're gleaning might be reasons for this positive changes in their individuals. I know that after you gathered all this, or at the same time, you were also making sure that you were looking at other sectors to provide kind of a comparison to the day service structures. And can you briefly tell me what people can learn from these comparisons and show a little bit about that?
Sure. So we looked at two things. We looked at WeWork, which is obviously aimed at people without disabilities, and is a place where people can book times to use office space, including shared space and common areas. And we also looked at senior centers, which are in every community. And they've got a nurse on site, they have meal options, they have a drop-in model. And, the similarities between those two were, instead of being a place where you had to be from 9 to 3, Monday through Friday, the location is a resource center that can be used and needed as desired.
Excellent. What else did you look at while you were gathering this information? Because I know it was really important that you didn't just kind of send the information along and say, okay, so now you got to do something with this, or we all want you to do something with this. You really put a lot of thought into how to come up with some basic scenarios that are a product of some of the ideas that came out of this, but also looking realistically at some of the other things that really already exist. So are there any other comparisons that you made that people should be looking at when they review these slides?
Right. So we looked at some existing innovative models in Massachusetts. We looked at the Seven Hills Aspire program, which operates in a similar way to a senior center or WeWork. The concern there was it is restricted to who could access it. It seemed to be people with a lot more skills as opposed to people with more involved behaviors. We looked at voice colors. We looked at the Life Need Co-op at the Stanton home. So those are 3 examples of agencies that have decided to do something out of the box.
Excellent. So what were the next steps that took place?
Well, we looked at the regulatory barriers, and we noted that while you can self-direct day supports in Massachusetts, you can't self-direct day habilitation, that community-based day supports must be done in a group, and you aren't allowed to choose individualized day supports if you live in a group home. We also looked out of state. So the District of Columbia allows individualized day supports regardless of where you live. They don't allow it for everybody, but if there's a documented need for individualized supports due to medical or safety issues, they allow it. Groups don't consist of more than 2 people. The Connecticut individualized day supports, as we read it, seems to have more flexibility than Massachusetts as well. So, and we took into account the fact that, change is already in the air because of social distancing issues. Day habs may need to have people attend in shifts anyway. And, with the need for increased personal space for safety, that could actually lead to quieter environments. So it seemed like a good moment.
So you start, I'm sorry to interrupt. So you started with starting a conversation that led to wanting to organize that conversation and gather data and information, anecdotal as well as some data-driven stuff. You turned that into a larger discussion. And while that was going on, you were able to start studying and researching existing programs, looking at innovative models. But then in addition, you made sure that you stewarded the responsibility of taking on this by making sure that the group really identified some of those biggest barriers that they could come up with. So you've come up with all of this. What are the next steps that are being taken?
So, again, that first meeting was a large group, and we wanted to make sure that we were organically getting input from as many people as possible. But, we're also trying to move quickly. And so we organized 3 smaller Zooms, and these were to capture discussions from 3 groups: families with adults sheltering in the family home, families with adults sheltering in settings outside the family home, and families of those under 22, some of those in the family home and some sheltering at residential schools. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to backtrack a second. This was preliminary to figuring out, once we got the full feedback from these smaller groups, how could we start to involve service providers and DDS in the discussion? So each of these small group Zooms addressed the same 6 questions. How do we create an option for our family member to choose what they want to do so they don't get bored? How do we address staff training in a time when budgets will be tighter than ever? How do we communicate what we've seen to DDS agencies and regulators as they redesign day services going forward? How do we make sure we get consistency and individualize? How do we pay for it? How do we bill for it? And how do we handle the issues of people who have medical issues?
Okay.
And so,
what were the results? Yeah, go ahead.
So the results were summarized and discussed in the second large group, and I've got the slides from that meeting on the following slides. And the primary outcome was that we wanted to reach out to a few service providers next to ask them to join the discussion and get their input, so that we can start to in the language of person-centered planning, start to bring this from a North Star to a possible and a positive. And the goal was to take steps towards a sustainable, billable, flexible approach to day services that is person-centered and helps people retain and build on the gains they've made. So now I'm just going to summarize those results from the small Zooms. There were 6 themes that emerged: person-centered, locations and venues, staff, payment, medically complex, and engaging DDS and other stakeholders. Person-centered, and again, this is idea generating. What actually turns into a concrete, real-life thing is going to be the result of discussions. So the opportunity to sample activities when people want to, individual choices of activities, locations, and times, flexible schedules that break up the 9 to 3 mold, splitting the day into multiple services. Not fewer services, but more flexible services. Should be meaningful, include home tasks, mowing, cooking, gardening, shoveling. Focus on communication skills. A lot of people talked about communication and how their kids were making headway in communication. A big theme was that the budget, the money needs to be attached to the person, not the location. My kid, needs the same level of support no matter where he is. It doesn't make sense that he's billable at a rate in one location and a different billable rate at another location simply based on the location as opposed to what he's doing. Teletherapy, telemedicine, staff trained on the individuals with more consistent staffing, staff who have the ability to give emergency meds, technology for queuing, communication, remote participation, visual support plans, person-centered planning for each of the group homes themselves. What do they have to offer in the way of resources that could benefit a broader community? help families navigate, including people in residential. And people pointed out that individuals have an opinion about their lives, and behaviors are caused by shoehorning people into programs. Now, in terms of locations and venues, people talked about drop-in centers, so booking time like WeWork, offerings like senior centers. Some may not necessarily need to be licensed because licensing can restrict what you can do there. So that might allow people, to, if I come over to this other bubble here, to create self-employed work options during home time or trips to other group homes or to centers. A range of programs, settings to appeal to different interests, sensory, gardening, outings, art, calm environments, quieter, fewer people, no fluorescence, to encourage self-management, self-cueing, self-regulating, bringing the day staff into the houses. Community outings from the group homes, because you have familiar staff, there's smaller outings, staff are MAP certified. Okay, we talked about the self-employed work options. Group home common areas and yards as drop-in spaces for small groups. Virtual offerings where people can benefit from, can participate from home. I'm sorry. In terms of staff, get input from the DSPs on what they need. Look at volunteer groups like AmeriCorps, Teach for America, City Year to supplement and help with recreation, especially things like bike riding or skating or swimming that often DSPs from other countries may not have a background in. Better pay and tying the pay to skill acquisition, such as registered behavioral technician or MAP certification. Doing RBT training through the community colleges, and the tuition is remitted if there is a 2-year commitment to group homes or working day services. In terms of transition, stagger the transition from to day from the transition to residential to improve training options. So if you transition to your residential a month before you turn 22, you can have staff from the school training the residential staff. Virtual staff training. This would allow you to spend more time with BCBAs on site checking for understanding rather than in the training room. Job descriptions tied to the person you're working with. Use one-page profiles so staff understand people. There was a lot of discussion about training. It should explain that not everything's a behavior. There are medical issues, there are human emotions. People felt that training should include parents, speakers, and siblings. There were thoughts about methodology, using video to train the staff, both on the person and on the skills. Training using visual supports and role-playing and simple English, since a lot of staff speak English as a second language or third language or fourth language. And it's way too easy to stand in a training room and say, do you understand what I just said, and have people nod. Training that emphasizes that staff should presume competency on the part of people they're working with, and training staff on technology like Zoom and apps for communication. In terms of payment, people talk about purchasing modules from an individual budget, which again goes back down here to this bubble down here about money following the person and not the location. We talked about waiver changes. Should there be an ASD ID waiver? Should there be individualized day supports for people in group homes? Virtual activities should be billable. Talking about higher CBDS rates for people with behaviors that affect health and safety. If we could have ABA billable through insurance, it could bring additional funding streams online. That would require passing the ABA bill. And open up the waiver and service definitions so that you can do what works. We talked about the medically complex. MAP training for day staff. One thing a lot of people raised was that people who had things like, who needed EpiPens or rescue inhalers were not being able to go out into the community because the staff taking them out into the community weren't MAP trained. Similarly, revisiting the MART contracts regarding medical limitations, such as carrying rescue inhalers or EpiPens. And we thought there should be a survey of families and caregivers and providers of people who are medically fragile. In terms of reaching out to DDS and other stakeholders, we looked at 3 groups: DDS, vendors, and other. And under DDS, we talked about the DDS Commissioner's Appeal for Input as a possible way to reach out. People suggested ask DDS what they want to know. People suggested DDS could design surveys with family input in the survey design. People felt strongly about that. Reaching out to the cabs. In terms of the vendors, people identified 4 groups: the administration, the program managers, the house managers, and the DSPs. And then finally, under other possible players, the Autism Commission was identified, as was the Disability Law Center and Mass Families Organizing for Change. Oh, excuse me. So at the end of this, we came up with a possible example, and this is admittedly rough and it's purely an example. But let's say you had a program where you had staff from the day program arriving at the home in the morning. 2 individuals leave for a drop-in center with home staff. 2 individuals stay home with staff from the day program. 1 participates in teletherapy and another participates in a virtual yoga class. 2 residents from another home arrive with staff from their house. They and 1 resident engage in gardening in the yard with staff while the 4th individual naps. Then everyone has lunch together, and then they all leave for their respective day programs. The first 2 individuals come home, 1 naps and 1 goes bike riding with a volunteer, maybe from AmeriCorps. And then, yeah, a lot to unpack there, and we understand that it's all hypothetical.
Can you just review one more time the purpose of this discussion and make sure that we are driving that home?
Right. So again, to recapitulate, the goal was to take steps towards a sustainable, billable, flexible approach to day services that is person-centered and helps individuals retain and build on the gains they've made.
Thank you. You know, this is a very big initiative. I know it's not something that anybody intended to just start up and take on, but it kind of grew out of this authentic spilling of stories, and it started with you, Kathy, just saying, you know what, oddly, surprisingly, interestingly, my kid's doing better, and the outpouring of responses just from that one post was extraordinary. And that's, so like we've said already, that's where this came, and this is where we are now. As a member of this initiative, I know that you are sending this video and these slides out to a small group of stakeholders who represent that next level. Some are vendors, some are people from other organizations, some might be from DDS. And so that is the next step. It's that smaller group to get started to bring some of these other stakeholders into the discussion. So people who are watching this may be going, well, why did I get picked? And I know that was, again, because in the last conversation that this larger group had, we identified some of the people who we felt as a group were out of the box creative thinkers, and people who would really bring some tremendous value to this conversation. So what is it that is the action item that you would like them to take away from watching this video?
Right, and we're doing this in tiers. We're starting with the service providers first, and then we'll bring DDS into the discussion a little later on. But what we're really looking for is for the people who see this to start to bring their voice to the table. So if you're receiving this, if you are watching this, we are asking you to, if you can, to join us on our next Zoom, and we're moving fast. So we understand that we won't be able to get everybody in the same room at the same time, virtual room at the same time. If you can't make it, please reach out to me or to Cheryl, and so that we can set up a time to get some input from you on a one-to-one basis, and bring that to the table. And we'll continue to reach out and ask you to participate when you can and as you can. And we know it's a new and changing time, and we know that providers are faced with rethinking things from the ground up due to social distancing and the space issues that conflicts directly with existing billing systems. And so we're trying to think out of the box together.
And that's a really good final point to make, that the idea of this is not to somehow undermine or change things without permission. This is not some sort of grassroots movement that's intended to turn things on its head. It's, the hope, I believe, if I could say so, is that these ideas will become part of informing the conversations about those next steps, that they will support and assist the other organizations from every tier, and that they will take into consideration all of these extraordinary ideas. So thank you. You want to wrap it up, Kathy?
Yes, and I actually want to wrap it up by mentioning something that you mentioned in the last large group discussion, which was that this is a gradual process, and right now we're thinking hypothetically, but as steps are taken towards opening, we'll get new evidence to feed back into the discussion, that we understand that this is not, that this has to be an exercise that's informed by evidence. And, that's the process we need to take, is a gradual, careful walking forward together.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Kathy. Thank all of you who have been watching this, and we look forward to working and collaborating with you.